Thank you. The book is called Untenable, the true story of white ethnic flight from America's cities. This book is set, it's in large part a memoir. I grew up in Newark, New Jersey, while the city was in full collapse. So I got a ringside seat on that, on what urban dysfunction is like, a long time before other people did. And I also went back to work for the Newark Housing Authority, so I've seen the worst of the worst. I mean, it is incredible. I mean, it is so bad. And this is, some years ago. It's only gotten worse because the root problem that is fatherlessness in the black community has only gotten worse. And no one wants to talk about it. You're not allowed to talk about it. When you go to talk about it, you get not banned, not censored. You get disinvited. My wife is from this area. She grew up in Dunkirk. When we were first courting, I met her in graduate school. And I came back to this area. I'm still only 22, 23 years old. And I was just so, it was so refreshing to have a town, a home you could go home to. Where the stores are there, the churches are there, your friends are there, your neighbors are there, the bars are there, the restaurants are there. For those of us who grew up in urban America and all across the Northeast, I mean, Buffalo, Cleveland, Detroit, Chicago, Philadelphia, that wasn't true. My neighborhood went from being what a lot of people called idyllic as late as 1960 to being unlivable, untenable by the early 1970s. I got the title of the book from a friend. He was the last guy out on our block. And what happened in with this exodus, this diaspora of people from the cities, is that most of them turned Republican. I grew up in a totally democratic world, and we were all for JFK, et cetera. And they virtually all turned Republican. So we have our family reunion in Ocean County, and I used the occasion of my family reunion to do my book TV, because I had a captive audience, right? I had all these people there, so I herded them into the American Legion Hall in Seaside Heights, New Jersey, and we did it. Now, Ocean County, New Jersey is redder than Chautauqua County. It went 2-to-1 Trump. This is where the people ended up. So when we left the cities, we couldn't afford to live in a nice, close, near-in suburbs. That was reserved for the people who were criticizing us as being racist. So families had to move 50, 60 miles away and find a home. And this is all what the book is about. But when I came to here, where people didn't have to move, they lived where they lived, and they still do, they still can. And it was just enormously heartening and refreshing to know that that could happen. So my friend, though, is the one who stayed a Democrat. And I was visiting with him a year or so ago when I was doing research for the book. And he was hosting us because he's had a stroke, and he can't get out that much. And his wife is there hovering in the background, totally woke, And so he's trying to be polite and trying to not offend her, His father was a union guy, which is why he stayed Democrat. And so he's arguing against interest in what I asked him. I said, Artie, you're the last guy in our block to leave. Everyone else had gone he's early 70s. He's there, living there with his widowed mother. He's probably in his early 20s. And I said, why did you leave? Why finally did you leave? And he said, he struggles to talk a little bit. He said, well, Jack, it became untenable. And I said, what do you mean by untenable? He said, well, when your home's invaded for the second time, that's untenable.
Oh, wow.
When your mother is mugged for the second time, that's untenable. So you take his story times a million, and you have the story of white ethnic flight from America's cities. I added white to the title because only whites are shamed for doing what we did. Michelle Obama's family fled her neighborhood, violated it was a Class C misdemeanor for her family to send her to school where they did. If she got caught, they would have to pay the school district back. But she gets to condemn white people, which she's done. In my neighborhood, one of the guys who lived in my neighborhood was a guy named John Houston. He's a generation older than me. He married a woman named Sissy Dugard, and they had and I got into this story because I asked one of the guys I talked to at least 50 people from my neighborhood about their experiences. I said, do you have any black people living on your block? And he said, yeah. He said, there was this one family down the street that had a little girl who became a famous singer. And I said, Whitney Houston? He goes, oh yeah, that's her. That's who it was, Whitney Houston. So I checked it out. I got Sissy's book, the mom's book, and to see if he was right, and he was wrong. So Whitney didn't live on our block, and the mom didn't live on our block, but the father did. And so Whitney Houston, as a grandchild, and when she was a little girl, would come to visit her grandfather, who lived on his block. And that's his connection to it. But I started reading about her story, and this is just classic. She writes a memoir about Whitney after Whitney died. And she said, you know, we lived in this nice little village in Newark. We were really happy there. We had a mixed ethnic, racial neighborhood. And then the violence got bad, and the crime got bad, and then the riots came. And I turned to John, I said, we got to get out of here. 3 years later, they moved to the suburbs. There's no shame to that. Donda West lives in the same neighborhood in Chicago as Michelle Obama. Her son goes out to the bike, out to the park. He's about 10 years old. Some guys mug him. They cut up the tires on his bike, take the bike. And she says, if they can do that to my little Kanye, we're out of here. This is Kanye West's mother. She goes, and then she says in her memoir, call it black flight, call it whatever, but we're gone. But only white people are shamed for doing this. It's what any responsible parent would do under the same circumstances. So that's basically what the book is about. But really, I would say if I have a message, a call to arms, it would be to, and I'd like to take some Q&A here rather than talk anymore. The need, and you guys are, I'm speaking to the choir here, you know this because you're here, the need to stand up and speak out. And the French have an expression, always live on last year's income, which means that when you go to work in the morning, you should be prepared to make it your last day, if you have to. And I know there's some people here who have and will, but it's not easy when you're living week to week. But if you got that year behind you, you can be your own person when you go to work. There's a line that you're not going to cross. You know, there's a vaccine you're not going to take. That is basically my story in a nutshell. The book is in large part memoir, and it's getting wonderful reviews because it's a very readable book. It's it's both comic, poignant, heartwarming, whatever. It involves stories of my parents and that generation, the great generation, the greatest generation. And we grew up, of course, in baby boomers. All of our parents were veterans, all of our fathers were veterans. All of them, not all of them, but virtually all of them. Virtually all of them served. My father was in the Pacific and in the Navy, but that wasn't unusual. That was expected. And then they came back, bought a home, and we had a 1880s fixer-upper, that my father bought for $7,000 and tried to build a life. And then our neighborhoods collapsed, and then we were scolded. And so I'm here to fight back, and I know I came to exactly the right place to find people who like to fight back. So I just give you, when I was fortunate to have the 1950 census come out in 2022. They wait 72 years to release each census. I don't know if anyone does ancestry and stuff. They know that. It's like JFK's brain or something. You gotta wait 72 years. But here's what my block was: one street, 1 block long. It was a narrow one-way street. Just as one block, one street and block. I use simultaneous. As synonyms. There were 360 in 1950. There were 363 people living on the block. This is just before we moved in. There were, and they list households. And they list, they're sexist, they list the male as the head of the household. 85 households on my block. 83 of them had a male head of household, right? 2 widows, this is post-war, you expect that. Of the 83 males, 79 had jobs. 2 were retired, 2 were unemployed. The 79 jobs, I list many of them in the book, it's fascinating. Virtually every blue-collar occupation you could think of short of a lumberjack. There were rubber molders, casket makers. One guy was a huckster. But of the 79 families, 30 of them had a woman working outside the home. And my favorite of all the titles was this woman who lists her profession as janitress, right? She's proud both of her job and her sex, right? Today you have to call actresses actors. They call themselves actors. Why de-sex yourself, But here this woman embraced them both. So, and I don't think there was a single college graduate on the block, from what I could tell. These were all blue collar or clerk kind of positions. And yet it was a harmonious, happy, congenial block. There were immigrants on the block from 14 different countries. When we moved to the block in 1953, we moved to a triplex at the top of the block. The triplex immediately south of us, north of us rather, had 3 black families. So the block was all integrated from as time as I can remember, harmoniously, until the 60s came. Then the families started breaking down. It was obvious what was happening, and that led to serious disorder very quickly, which was institutionalized by Lyndon Johnson in his Great Society because he could count on votes for the next 4,000 years or whatever he said. I don't know. So, in my neighborhood, I grew up in a very Catholic neighborhood. It was overwhelmingly Catholic, so the neighborhood was much more resistant to change than neighborhoods where they depended on public schools. So, because we went to Catholic school. What happened to Newark had a very, for instance, very vibrant, thriving Jewish neighborhood, very famous Jewish neighborhood. And they were the most welcoming of blacks into their neighborhood, and they were the first ones out. Because not only did they depend on public education totally, but they expected excellent education for their children. They had very high expectations. And when they couldn't be met, they were gone. That way they could move to the suburbs and write editorials about the people who are still living in the city about what racist they were. It works out. Kind of a nice closed loop of, not all of them obviously, a lot of them, I've heard from a lot of Jewish people who went through, terrible times, just like the rest of us did. The Italians in my world were the ones who fought hardest and stuck it out the most. So if you left, you were accused of white flight. If you stuck around and fought it out, you were accused of racism and whatnot, white nationalism, or whatever they're calling it now. So. I have some books here. The book is called Untenable, The True Story of White Ethnic Flight from America's Cities. And I'm going to talk about this in the context of what's happened in the last couple of weeks. This all started, by the way, with my first book that I ever published, which is called 2006, The Chautauqua Rising. Yeah, I started this book 25 years ago, and what it did is it anticipated the Tea Party surge in about 2009, 2010. As I was watching events unfold, I said, boy, this is, even by my own humble standards, pretty prophetic. But this is what starts it. So they have that book at Fredonia, right? Now my wife, Joan, who's a donor to the Darwin Barker Library, by the way, and she sees the book on the shelves, and wives being put on this earth to make men more polite, she tells me, you should email this librarian who put the book on the shelves. And I said, okay, I'll do that. So I send her an email. I said, oh, thank you for putting the book on the shelves, and if I can return the favor, just let me know. So she emails me back, how would you like to come and speak at our speaker series, right? And I said, oh, sure. And I'm not getting paid for this, and it's not, I said, sure, fine, I'm happy to do it. Just to repay the favor. And so, nothing happens for a week. And the book in question, and here's what set him off, I'm sure. The book in question is called Untenable, but the subtitle is The True Story of White Ethnic Flight from America's Cities. And there are people in the Fredonia area who, when they see that word and it's italicized, I say, oh, you mean he's going to tell us something that we haven't been told? He's going to counter the narrative we've been told about race in America for the last 60 years? Yes, he is. He's about to. And that set them off. So I get an email. It's a wonderful thing. Orwell couldn't have written this email. You'd have to read it. I've excerpted some of you have seen parts of it. And it says, he goes, first, Fredonia's a nice town, right? Even the post office people are nice in Fredonia, and the library's next to the post office. We go there all the time. And it starts off saying, I hope you're doing well, okay, and that sort of blah, 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 blah. It's like little pleasantries, and then he says, as much as we value the diversity of expression here, it's all like their woke boilerplate. And then he says, as much as we value diversity of expression, we find that because of recent developments, your viewpoints will be unsuitable for our diverse audience. I'm thinking, okay.
Too diverse.
Yeah, a diverse audience, you're in a county that gave Trump a 20-point margin, okay? This is our country, not theirs. Also, Fredonia has a black population, the population that might possibly be offended, of less than 2%, right? So the diverse audience is in their imagination. The diverse audience looks like us, right? I mean, this is what it looks like. But which is diverse, because we have diversity of opinions, which is why we're here tonight. This is just the beginning, because it opens the door for us to, it gives me a platform to talk about what's happening in America. And that is, it's trickle-down cancel culture, trickle-down wokeism. And just like we were talking about it earlier in your public schools, you know, 25 years ago, 30 years ago, we thought it was just universities, you know? And it's not. It's infecting all of our daily lives. As the one board member told my wife when she protested, he said, well, we're not banning him. He can always go out to the gazebo and talk, right? I mean, literally said that, the gazebo in the park. The recording, it was like watching a Monty Python skit. I mean, it was like, so I tell that story, and I also talk about what happened, why it happened, and how it is continuing to resonate down to this day. And here's the problem that I think we face, and that is that they rule by fear. And there's a lot of issues they use to make us, you know, beat us over the head with. You know, you can be a homophobe, sexist, you know, classes, xenophobe, climate change denier, whatever, you know, there's lots of words to put you in your place, but none is as powerful as racist.